here calibrating, but we're gonna get going because there's a lot to share in the hour and a half that we have for this. So I just want to start by making some introductions. I think, board, you know most of the folks here. So Doug Wilson, Ryan, Karen from Sports Services and Capital Project. And then we also have 4 members of the EDTF who are here with us today. And they actually were also part of the EDTF subcommittee that spent an incredible amount of time wrestling with the actual detailed data to develop the boundary proposal that will be released soon.
There's a bulb out in the projector.
All right.
The red bulb is out in the projector.
Would you like me to call technology and
So
you want to do something?
you've got a color copy here, so we'll just kind of refer to this as a better agenda. So Stacy Russ, Mitch Evans, Kara Roth, Katrina Rose. I think most of you have met all of them, or some of them at least at one time or another. So we are on this is a bit of awkward timing. What we're sharing with you today is the boundary plan that will be released later on, which is being anxiously awaited by numbers of school communities, as you might imagine. Yeah. However, we are still, what will be shared today reflects the plan that will be released.
Take me a second.
But we are not in a position to release this plan any earlier. So there may be some, obviously we have some visitors here today, there may be some disconnected timing between today and when we're actually able to go live. Because when we go live, we want to be able to make sure that we've got all the technology back end of the maps, the system for inputting your addresses, et cetera, to determine what schools you will be in. And so we want to make sure we've got all of that right. So there may be a little frustration or anxiety that ratchets up later this week, and we really apologize for that, but we also needed to get this information in front of you before we share it with the community. So it's kind of the way the timing is all coming together.
So that's going to be available on the 31st?
31st to the 1st?
It will be the 31st, and we'll go through the full communication plan at public participation.
So we'll just be a few days.
So yes. 2 days could be a long time for some people.
So nobody today, let me clarify, no one today, not even myself, can look at my address and find out where I'm going to school?
Correct.
Yeah, not until,
Okay, so we have this information, but we don't know until 31st. Here, us.
And even today, your information
So if
will be
anybody asks me, I don't know where
your
it's
information
going.
today will be at a pretty global level.
Okay,
But obviously, once this information goes out about how many students may be transitioning from one school community to another, people will automatically want to know the next question, well, is it me?
right,
You
correct.
know, who is it? And that's where we may
I
just
want to know
have,
that too.
we may have some anxious moments over the next several days until we're ready to launch. But we want to make sure we do it right, because what we don't want to do is get misinformation or inaccurate or incomplete information out there for people, because then that's a hard game to try and catch up
But
on.
these are still, in the end, these are drafts and still could shift how it's
Yes.
implemented. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so,
Sorry, we're switching, unless you don't want to wait. This will take about 2 minutes.
so in the meantime, I just want to make sure we thank our community group because they spent many hours. And we had to overload them with sugar just to get through the process. So,
It was just
it was just
I think this other one might be bigger.
yeah, but we definitely, I would say, spent 40, 50 plus hours together, really going through this process and asking a lot of hard questions. Know that I think we tried to vet as many options as possible, even the most ugly option of what it would look like to bus everybody east. And we all agreed that probably wouldn't be a good option or a good recommendation for us at this point in time. So I think that's going to be, I think the next challenge will be then, what do we do from this point on and how do we continue to promote that?
That ugly option was called zombie apocalypse. It wasn't good. People were on the bus for an hour and a half. It was not good.
The first month we're going to Wellington.
Check
Yeah.
to see how it's calibrated.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Yeah, we had,
Kids needed to go to Wellington.
The very north end,
Yeah.
up far north.
yeah, and Stacy didn't think that would be a good option.
All right.
Okay, we good
Well,
now?
let's
We're a little,
calibration.
we're a little sideways, but we'll be all right.
That's okay.
Hopefully
That's
this
okay.
calibration is better.
Once you see the report, everybody will be a little sideways.
All right. Come on.
All right, point.
Yeah,
Ready?
it's coming.
It's coming.
It's worth waiting for.
It is worth
It really
waiting
is.
Pretty special.
All right. Okay. So, I think you guys all have the presentation in front of you. And so we'll sort of keep the first portion of the presentation, a little bit of the history, membership, considerations. We'll go through that pretty quickly. I think we've covered that in the past with you. We really want to focus on the modeling outcomes and then the estimated impacts and really our recommendations. And then really give the community group the opportunity to answer as many questions as possible since they did the majority of the work. Okay, I would say all of the work. Okay, so a little bit of history here, and I think you'll find this fascinating. We started this in the 50s. So one of the things that we want to share with you is some of the schools that we built in the 50s. As you can see, Bothell High School was built in 53. Then we got to that sort of psychedelic 60s. And as you can see, we built a few more schools, Inglemoor High School being the next school that we built. And then we call it the Long Pants 70s. That's what at least Doug called it. And you know, same thing, I think at this time we skipped a high school. Right? And then our last schools that we built was in the 80s, which was Woodinville High School. And then in the 90s, a couple things happened in the 90s. One, we built our last schools, Timbercrest being our last school that we built in the 90s. But more importantly, the urban growth line was established in the 1990s. So that really changed the direction of the district as we continued to grow east prior to the 90s. Now, as you can see, somewhere about here is the King and Snohomish county lines. So as you can see, the north end is our Snohomish urban growth line. The south portion will be our King County line. Okay. So same thing, just a little bit of history. We'll do this real quick. Last high school opened, Woodinville High School. In the 90s, we had the urban growth. Last junior high was built then. 2000, we established the Enrollment Demographics Task Force in 2001. And remember in 2006, we did a boundary change. And I think Doug refreshed my memory where we only impacted about 8 elementary schools, I believe. And how many students though?
About 1,700.
1,700 students. So this is sort of the plan from 2006 would be A, we're doing really B now. And we're just continuing along that plan from 2006. Right, and then in 2008, we decided to hold off on any consolidation or repurposing of a new elementary school. Okay. And then again in 2010, we hit this sort of lull in the economic downturn. We received board approval of a new high school in 2017. And then we are getting additional information around K-3 information, full day K information, with hopefully 2014 we can give you a recommendation for 2017 as far as boundaries. All right, so I think we've all seen this chart before also, where I think one of the things in EDTF we had to determine was some options that we were going to, how we're going to address the district over the next 3 to 4 years. We looked at some really short-term options. And we checked every single short-term option that we can think of to get us through this time period. Now we're sort of focused on the mid to long-term options. And that's going to be your adjusted service area, adjusted feeder patterns, and then the new construction of North Creek High School in 2017. Right? As well as we also are looking at additional property or the assemblage that we've talked about for any future growth that we may have in the district. So as you can see, lots of smart people on the committee. Many of them are two-term reps, if not longer. And many of them have enjoyed our nice cold sandwiches and salad that we have provided for them during the committee meeting. But this is a really good group who has really, really dove deep into the details. And I think more importantly, really started to understand the full impact of demographics, housing growth, everything that impacts the capacity for schools. Okay? And as Larry shared earlier, we split the Enrollment Demographics Task Force up into a smaller subcommittee. And the goal of the subcommittee was to even dive even deeper into the details as we start really necking down the boundary lines from 1 mile to behind someone's house or on the street or where we're going to draw that line. And I think they really did a great job taking this 1 mile boundary line and really necking that down to this is what we think our best option will look like. Okay? So, a couple key things that we had to really focus on during this. The Enrollment Demographics Task Force had to establish some considerations that we would be using. And we had to give ourselves some guidelines. What would be some of our guidelines that we would be looking for? And we consider those our instructional considerations. So as you can see, we've identified a few things under each of the considerations: instructional, demographic, operational, and geographic. Okay? As well as the second thing that we did is we went out and did a community survey. And we shared these considerations with the community, asking them for additional insights that we could use, and we're considering that our community themes. So in our community themes, they've identified from the community the academic programs and location, feeder patterns, proximity to school, busing, cohorts and neighborhoods, and then waivers. So these consideration and themes were used as part of the basis on how we're going to draw our boundaries for the district. So we also had to make a few assumptions. Some assumptions are static, some assumptions are dynamic and still moving, but these are a few of the assumptions that we made in our committee.
I'll back up to that one a little bit. I don't think we want to skip over that too casually. So, were there any questions on any of those? So we are not counting for K-3 class size reduction in our planning. We are counting for full day kindergarten within 2017. So obviously, if K-3 came in, I mean, regardless of this plan, we would have a huge issue anyway, as would many districts across the state.
We're making the assumption that the urban growth line will stay static through 2021, knowing that I think it's being reviewed in the next 2 or 3 years, and it's on a 10-year cycle.
So what does Laura say about that? Is that a realistic?
Well, depending on who you chat with, if you look at Snohomish County, I think they're pro-growth. So I think the council's going to have to determine how much more growing they want to do. But if you look in King County, I think they're holding steady on their growth. And that's some of the challenges that I think we have being in 2 counties. One part of our district would shift, while the other part may stay static.
Is it? This is a later date than when you started with the assumptions. And is 2021 still a reasonable projection for no change in that?
It's,
in Snohomish County?
yes, it's based on what we know in the housing, and I think in the end of February, we're coming back with an updated enrollment demographics from Les. So we'll get much better information.
A year better.
A year better. Right. But yeah, we feel pretty good about our housing numbers.
So if any of those static points change, then does that mean the boundaries would need to be looked at as far as adjustments, so they would be readjusted?
Some more than others.
Yeah.
So that's what the process will be over the 15-16 school year, you know, leading up to then the final recommendation coming to the board in April, will be to continue to study all of the data we can to be as thorough and as updated as we can in incorporating that information into the final boundary plan.
Yeah.
Okay, I just didn't want
Yeah, no,
to
that's-
gloss over that one.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Sorry. If you guys have any questions, and community members, if you want to jump in, feel free.
There's a drive to change the urban growth boundary. Everybody in the housing industry is pushing for that to get bigger as we run out of dirt to build houses on. Snohomish County will be more amenable to that. There's a lot of money in the war chests to change those boundaries outward as large and as far as possible. So of course, in Snohomish County, that means more in Fernwood, more in Canyon Creek. More at the north end that's already way overloaded, but King County will change too. It's just a matter of how much.
How much? Yeah. So, I think we also shared this boundary process with you that the subcommittee went through, and it's a pretty simple process. We built some modeling for this where.
Make it straightforward.
I think Doug tried to simplify it. How's that? That's better. And a couple things we know we had to look at, some key parameters. We knew we had to take a look at our head counts for current and projection. So those are some of the things that we sort of looked at, is our current head count and then the projection, the projected out. We also know that we have to take a look at our building capacity. And I think the one thing we kind of all wrestled with in the subcommittee is, what's that capacity number? Is it 100%? Is it 60%? And I think we settled on an 85% capacity, given what's there currently today.
So can we talk about
Mhm.
how portables play into that
Mhm.
capacity? Because I noticed on the previous, includes portables with some exceptions.
Yes. Yes.
So when the subcommittee, when we were doing our work, we realized that at some point through the various scenarios that we ran, that without moving kids a long way, especially from the north end, we needed to maintain the numbers of portables that we currently are having, like Fernwood and Coatney and Canyon Creek and such, for the time being. And so the projections that we were doing and the pockets, or the assumptions we were doing about boundaries assumed that those portables were still going to be there. And we looked at other schools, we're using different capacities, but there were the few exceptions where we used buildings, or we knew that we couldn't use just the hard capacity of the building without portables.
Yeah, permanent.
So
So,
way to put it.
yeah.
When you say 85% capacity, does that include then that the school has full use of their gym, that they would be able to use a room for, I mean, what
It was,
parts of the building are still
sure,
open?
it was purely classroom capacity.
Mhm.
So what we had to take a look at is two factors. What is the permanent classroom capacity? And the exercise that we did, or one of the exercises we did as a subcommittee, is only using permanent classroom capacity. And that was the, oh my God, option.
That was the zombie
Sure.
process.
Yeah. So I think we came to the realization real quick that I think we had to use then portable structures also as part of the capacity. And so what we decided to do is to make it equal across the board. We just took a 85% factor number, assuming for one or two things. One, that we knew we could continue to grow in specific areas of the district. And two, if we needed to make program changes. So we had the flexibility to move programs around in the north end today, or in the future, that we don't have that flexibility that we have today.
So Brian, the 85%,
It was just an arbitrary number.
but that's been a fairly
That's the
typical number that we've used over time to
Yes.
reflect the fact that schools get, the rooms in schools get used for lots of different things other than classroom instruction.
Yeah.
So when you look at just that, you know, what's the actual usable percentage to account for all of those other kinds
That
of
still
pull-outs.
leaves rooms available for other
Correct.
The pull-out,
music
Pull-out
or
intervention programs, all of
computers.
those kinds of things. yeah.
Technology.
Yeah, without backfilling other classes.
And it would be safe to say that you didn't count the gyms as a classroom
Yeah, that's right,
space,
but
right?
not an
Or
example, but.
a specifically designed music room
Yes.
or a small, right,
Yes.
yeah.
We use your typical 1,000 square foot
Right.
classroom.
But that's been a fairly typical percentage that we've been using for the last, it's not a new percentage.
And would it also be safe to say that 85% capacity would be interpreted as completely full by many of the buildings?
For some, I think, what would be full, I think, is more of the shared spaces, your cafeterias, gyms. I think
The infrastructure capacity.
Right, and every school has a different capacity, so that's made it even more interesting, I think, as we went through this exercise. We just couldn't pick a number.
and it's a kind of a subjective number too, obviously.
Gives you more options for waivers also.
So,
Yeah.
so then what we've tried to do is to continue to simplify this, is Doug built a what-if model. And within this model, we identified pockets within each of our school boundaries and identified the number of students we had in each of those pockets. So now we're moving small puzzle pieces out if we needed to make some adjustments instead of a big chunk of the district boundary, okay, or the school boundary. So an example of that is, this is our current service area for Fernwood. Okay. As you can see, I think there's about 9 or 10 pockets that was built in here. And each one of the pockets was built around the consideration and themes that was identified for us. So trying to use natural boundaries, I think, keeping neighborhoods together. That's how we built our pockets. The other thing that I think is going to be key in these pockets is that if you look on the west pocket versus the pocket on the east, the density of the pocket. What you don't see on here also that we had to factor in is the housing development, the future housing development.
There's a ton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you look at,
Crazy, but.
the density might be high today in our current enrollment, but the projection for the density of the eastern part of our district is going to be greater. Okay? So this is one of the exercises we went through, and then we had to really identify a service area, a new service area, and then decide what we're doing with the pockets that is not in that current service area. So for example, the western part of the pocket in Fernwood will go somewhere else, and the eastern pocket will go somewhere else.
And this is an old example that we've used for Fernwood. This isn't the final.
Don't memorize them.
Just saying.
Conceptually, though, the exercise has been shifting population south and east.
Yeah, continue to push south and east, similar to what I think what has happened in 2006.
Just trying to figure out, southeast.
Southeast.
I think that would be, that makes sense for us. We
Yeah.
don't go north.
And so the schools don't move, obviously, but, you know, as you project out, for example, in 2018, 20, whatever, in this case, is this based on the capacity of the school that we know, with portables in this case, the only kids that'll fit are the ones in the service area. So the rest of the kids wouldn't fit within that capacity. So that's the same basic problem. They will fit somewhere.
Okay.
Just the aha moment that Amy and I had when we attended is that there are several pockets where there are no kids.
Yes.
Yeah, like there's one here.
That-
Yeah.
Right,
And right now.
so that might be helpful to know which ones those are, as people come and say, why can't you move this pocket?
Yes.
It doesn't matter what we do with that.
So
But
So I think there's two factors that we had to look at. One was the current density, and one was the future growth. Those are the two things that we really have to look at as we determine how to draw this boundary for a Fernwood, as the example.
Because there could be less folks in an area, but there will be folks in that area versus this is actually an industrial area and it doesn't matter.
Right.
There won't be.
or it's woods.
Or it's
Or it's
wood.
woods and it's
And a
over
ravine.
a boundary.
Yeah.
a growth boundary.
We have a couple pockets where it's very dense, but there's virtually no kids there.
Right.
Because the population and the housing age and all those kinds of things, they could turn over sometime in the future, but, so all those factors.
Okay. So we'd like to focus a little bit on the proposal for the elementary service area. Again, what we tried to give you is some framework around the dotted line that goes across horizontally is our King and Snohomish county lines. So you can see the schools in the King County versus Snohomish. And then our urban growth line is just down the center of that. Okay, so this is our 2014-15 current service area. This is the recommendation that we're making right now of the number of kids going from to a receiving to school. Okay. The impact of this change, and again, this is only boundary changes at the elementary level,
Not reworking.
not rate
This is
reconfiguration.
a 2017
Only boundary.
K-5 kids, so they're,
So a couple of things to note is that,
Sixth grade is now out of there.
Yeah, sixth grade is out.
so a couple of things to note, if you look at a school like Kokanee. So Kokanee in the plan, if you go up to the top, is we're receiving some students from Canyon Creek, but then it is also moving some students from Maywood to Woodland. So some schools will be on both ends of that spectrum of enrollment shift.
So Kokanee's sending 80 to Maywood and 80 to Woodland. Is that
And
what
receiving-
I'm
and
reading?
receiving-
And receiving
I'm receiving
30
from-
from Canyon Creek. So it's a very complex.
Yeah,
So if you remember this,
and the sixth grade is moving.
yeah, the
Not
concept
included.
for us was moving kids south, east. Right, so that was the movement we had to do, with the caveats that there were some considerations we still had to implement while we were doing this, like making sure the school was in the service area, right? And then, so if you look at the map of schools and service areas,
That's helpful.
we didn't put that in the assumptions.
yeah, you'll see that many of the schools are in some south, one of the borders. Okay?
That was harder than it sounds, to actually keep the school in its own district.
Yeah,
Especially
sure.
Crystal Springs,
Yeah.
they really wanted to go down into the next district, because along with the south and east, they had to move a little bit south down into, well, you're back there.
Yeah,
To kind of get people over to the west, because that area isn't growing either, but a lot less than the area out the east isn't growing. So little shifts all over the place.
Is this taking into account the population growth that will happen over the next few years?
Yeah, on some of those, you'll see where there's a zero, so like there's a pocket that moved from Fernwood to Kokanee, but right now there are no kids in there.
That's that really,
Okay, right.
but it's gonna have some housing development
Okay,
Yeah.
in 2000, up to 2021. That's the data that we use.
And then like the Woodmore to Sunrise, that's one of those,
That's the geese.
It's the turf farm.
it's the turf farm, but it's also that question the public's gonna ask you, like, why is that hanging down like that over there? Since there's nobody in it, we left it off, because there's no kids there anyway. It's nothing but a turf farm. And it won't, you won't get that question.
Right, and if they ever do build there, we would rather than go to Sunrise, because they're gonna need more people.
I was there when you talked about that.
So, based on the, our shift of movements for 2017, this is sort of the projections we're looking at landing K-5 for 2017. There's still, as we continue to talk about in our task force, there's still two issues we need to continue to resolve. And it's going to continue to be the north end growth that we have up in that area, Fernwood, Canyon Creek, Kokanee, as the urban growth line continues to shift east. and then our low enrollment on the eastern part of our district, right? Given that they are the outside of our urban growth boundary.
But it's a good illustration though of sort of the practical limitations of where you can move things before you're, all of a sudden you're outside, the service area is outside, the school's outside the service area where you can go.
Yeah, if you notice like Kokanee and
Goes all the
Woodland
way
there,
to Fernwood.
yeah.
What was that?
Basically heads all the way up to the Fernwood area.
Yeah, Kokanee's huge, but not by numbers.
But it's like like Montana.
Alaska.
I mean, Alaska, so
Kokanee's Alaska.
huge geographic space, but not as many kids compared to
Fernwood's Canada.
Rhode Island, right?
That's a good way to now.
I mean, you kind of think
That's a good
about it
analogy.
that way.
Well, look at the number of kids in Lockwood.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, it's dense, quite dense right there.
Crystal Springs.
Crystal Springs
Crystal Springs, same thing.
in those areas, West Hill. So,
So I want to try to keep it at the 1,000-foot level, but I was curious about one small level there when I looked at Arrowhead and ML is
Orleans.
Is the capacity much lower at Arrowhead?
Yes.
Well, if you see how close Morelands is to that western boundary?
Yeah.
If we move any more kids to Arrowhead, those are gonna be the Morelands walkers.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
And so that's, I mean, one of our, near the top of our thing, we
Trying
really
with
don't wanna
seven.
take the walkers and put them on a bus to a different school.
Isn't it also
And I know
accurate
that's
that
kind of a low level
Arrowhead,
question.
Arrowhead has a very odd footprint in that you
Yes.
cannot put more portables than are currently there, and it's a small school, so.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a state park and a golf course.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
and there's no way to put a
exactly.
portable on the 18 holes.
It's dangerous in and out. Some of the
Yes, it
schools
is.
are transportation issues, you're dangerous in and out.
It
I mean-
also has a population that's beginning to shift a little bit. People are starting to turn over their homes the way they haven't for several years, so.
So let's give you
That makes
kind of an example of this at the 10,000-foot level. So one of the things we had to do is overlay your King and Snohomish line, right, and then your urban growth line.
Mhm.
And part of what we had to look at is your current enrollment, and then all of our projection enrollment that we have out there. Then once we started looking at this and looking at the capacities, we had to then overlay the considerations. One of the considerations was if you live within a circumference of your school and you're a walker, we don't want to bus you to the next school.
Yeah,
zone.
that makes sense.
Okay? So as you look at the school locations, they're not plopped right in the middle of the boundary.
Dang.
Right? So trying to make a cut, as Mitch talked about, if you look at Crystal Springs, because it's in the furthest south of the boundary, pretty tough to move kids north past Crystal Springs to the next school. So we really had to finagle some pockets around and
Well, and
really
even
look at
Maywood
what's the
Hills.
best way to shift.
Maywood's right on the edge of its eastern.
What I've shared with the committee before, if, this is kind of like, in 2006, we picked the low-hanging fruit and moved the first 1,600 kids. This is that next layer of fruit. We got to go climb a little bit higher, dig a little bit deeper, do a little bit more work in how we would move this and tweak it around as much. So this is just sort of the continuation from the 2006 boundary adjustments that we had.
And speaking of 2006, you mentioned that in 2006, you only had
Eight
eight
schools,
elementary
yeah.
schools impacted. The only one we didn't, for lack of a better term, molest was
I'd say impact.
was Lockwood.
Yeah.
And Wellington.
and Wellington did.
Wellington, we ended up putting that back?
Yeah.
Okay, so out of all the schools, 18 of them got switched. That's, I think, what you mean about low-hanging fruit versus
Right.
now we're really working at it to change people.
So last week at our elementary principals meeting, I said that the impact was going to be everybody, and Lockwood was probably not going to have the, and elementary principals are thinking Gary is buying
Yeah.
somebody something sometime soon.
I think the other thing, if you remember this, and when we went into this from the EDTF and the subcommittee, is that we knew we had two issues that we had to try to solve. One was the north end growth, or the north central part. But the eastern part of our district, we had to continue to figure out how to move more kids east, right, to balance up the district and provide that equal sort of opportunity for programs. And that was the big thing that we continued to look at, is we knew east was not going to continue to grow with new homes. We knew that the urban growth line that was established in 1990 was really doing what it's supposed to do. And what we've seen in the trends is the trends continue to decline with student enrollment. Okay? So,
Because really with that whole southeast shuffle, Wellington kind of gets to be the pivot point. So with Kokanee and Woodin, you'll see they're so close to the eastern edge of their boundary, we can't pull any more kids east or we're taking the walkers.
Yeah.
So, you know, so until the Wizards come and move the schools for it, we're kind of stuck where we are.
People get very, very unhappy when they're walkers and
Yes.
becomes.
Yeah.
Well, and
Bus by their
it's-
school.
there's a lot more cost when we're having to bus them, so it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
so the other thing that we just wanted to share is that fisheye we put up there. So this is the multi-site that we purchased, I believe, in 2010, 2011. Right, so we have this multi-site available in that north end as we continue to look at how to solve the north end growth population.
And that will be incorporated as
Part of
part of the recommendation that will come in April.
So middle school. Right, so same thing, current 2014